Hey folks, Quill18 here, bringing you another audio commentary for League of Legends. This time I'm not going to be commentating a game. Instead, I'm going to be doing a tutorial slash overview of the various items that are available for purchase in the item shop. This is going to be sort of a beginner level tutorial, obviously, but hopefully I may be able to sneak in a little bit of theory crafting on some of the items that some of the more moderate to advanced players may find interesting. I absolutely love theory crafting. It was one of my favorite things to do in World of Warcraft, and I was always all about min-maxing everything that I could, finding out, a way to sneak out an extra 1% DPS so I could perform better in raids, and hopefully I can do the same thing here. I'm not necessarily the sharpest player, the best player, the one with the best reflexes, but I've got to hope that when I really put my mind to it, I can think up of some good ways to maximize my item choice. Alright, without further ado, let's go. I'm going to go through one category. I don't know how loud that sound was from the game. I'm going to go through one category at a time. Obviously, a lot of the items repeat from category to category, so we'll try not to double up on any of that. We're going to start with the health category. I'm going to save the elixir for later when I get to the consumables tab. There are going to be two major divisions of items. Some of the items are going to be just the basic items, and some of them are going to be recipes. So they're going to be evaluated a little bit differently, especially the items that you can buy right from the beginning. So we're going to start with the Doran's Shield. Doran's Shield is obviously an item meant to be bought at the very beginning of the game. It does not upgrade into anything, and its value is going to be kind of questionable later in the game. It's not to say it's not a good item. In fact, for the money, it's a fantastic item. It gives you lots, gold per gold. It gives you tons and tons of stuff. And at the beginning of the game, the health regeneration is actually really, really important. One thing you want to avoid is getting into a trap where you're looking at other items, for example, the Warmog's armor, and considering the health regen part to be a really valuable part of the item, because once you get to past the laning phase, health regeneration really doesn't have the same kind of value anymore, and it's almost a wasted stat. I mean, it's not entirely true, but in practice, in a one-on-one fight, it's not going to help. In a team fight, it's not going to help. So your Doran's Shield as a first item, though, is amazing. It gives you so much durability that you can survive a lot of the low-level fights that happen early on. So if they're trying to gank you, or if you guys are trying to do a gank and maybe it's not going so well, this makes you considerably tougher. I mean, for a lot of heroes, the Doran's Shield is going to represent as much as 25% more health. The armor is not negligible either. Now, you do start with some armor as is, even without any items, but this does help. And of course, the health regeneration means you can stay in a lane longer. Depending on the character that you're playing and depending on the opposition you're facing in the lane, Doran's Shield could theoretically mean you can stay in it indefinitely, until you want to go back home to purchase an item. So a Doran's Shield, really, really strong. It's the sort of thing, once you get to the end of the game and you've filled up all your slots and you need to make some more room for an Uber item, don't be afraid to sell it. In fact, once it gets to a certain point in the game, you can make the decision to sell it anyway if the extra money from selling the Doran's Shield is going to be enough to allow you to buy some sort of Uber item. Definitely something to keep in mind. So Doran's Blade is the next starting item. All the Doran items are starter items, and that's what they're meant to do, give you a variety of stats. It's pretty good. The Doran's Blade gives you the same amount of health. Instead of armor, it gives you damage, and instead of health regeneration, it gives you lifesteal. In a lot of ways, Doran's Blade is equivalent to Doran's Shield. However, I find it has a lot less value. It is nice to have a little extra damage, makes his last hitting a little easier, and assuming you've got the right kind of character, usually a ranged DPSer, the damage can help you harass and do that sort of thing. But generally speaking, if I'm got a character who's ranged and who I just want to be harassing with, I'll just start with a longsword or something like that. I don't find the lifesteal is enough to really make good value. It does keep you in the lane a little bit longer, but generally speaking, I prefer the Doran's Shield to the Doran's Blade, so whenever possible, that's the item. I tend to go for the Shield versus the Blade. Not to say that the Blade's a bad item, that's definitely the case. Doran's Ring, of all the Doran's items, Doran's Ring is possibly the best one. Now, it doesn't give you health regen, so obviously it's not going to be the ideal if you are, say, a melee character, even if you can use the ability power of the mana regen, which is pretty unusual for a melee character. But for a ranged person, it's awesome. Again, it gives you the health, and for a lot of casters, you're not going to be walking around with a whole lot of health, so the 120 points you get from the Doran's Ring is actually going to be quite notable. The mana regen does help you spam your abilities a little bit more. I'm going to talk about regen a little bit more with some of the other items, so I don't want to overdo it here, but the ability power is quite sexy. Now, for roughly the same cost, you could buy yourself the Amplifying Tome, which gives you more ability power without the other stuff. And depending on what character you're playing and how you want to upgrade your items, that may be a better choice. But these Dorn items really are quite solid, and there was a time when I avoided them because I didn't like the fact that you couldn't upgrade them, but I've since realized that for the money that you're spending, they're quite strong. And in League of Legends, the early game, those first few levels, the laning phase is so critical to establishing yourself, and these give you such a great advantage in those phases that those 3 items are excellent on virtually any hero. The only time I don't tend to get them is when I can get an item right from the start that is also pretty decent and upgrades into an item I want very early on. Next item on the list is the Ruby Crystal, which gives you flat health, and you'll notice, look at the cost, 475 gold. This is 40 gold more than Dorn's Shield, but only gives you 50% more health, doesn't have the armor, doesn't have the health regen. You can see how powerful the Dorn's Shield is compared to the Ruby Crystal. Dorn's Shield is obviously a much better item for the money. The difference is the Ruby Crystal upgrades into a lot of really amazing items. The Aegis of the Legion, which I adore, Phage, well, variety of things. The Catalyst, the Protector, although a lot of characters I don't think are going to go from Ruby Crystal to Catalyst. The order will be different, but I'll talk about that more later. Ruby Crystal is very good for its upgrade. If you want a really early Aegis, starting with a Ruby Crystal is possibly going to be your best pick to do that. But I'll talk about the Aegis more once I get to that. Heart of Gold is actually another item that upgrades from the Ruby Crystal, and that's another half-decent item to rush for any tank. A lot of tanks have difficulty farming, so the fact that the Heart of Gold generates money is actually quite valuable. After a few minutes, I don't remember the number, but it's between the 10 and 15 minute mark. I think it may actually be like 12 and a half minutes. It will have paid for itself, I believe. I guess I can do it generates 30 gold per minute. So after 10 minutes, it'll do 300 gold. Yeah, and what it's doing, paying for itself, it means, so you're still getting the health and the armor, which you've paid for by the base items. So the difference is you're having to pay extra to upgrade the Heart of Gold. Actually, it costs you 200 gold to upgrade to a Heart of Gold. So the Heart of Gold pays for itself the 200 gold cost after, 6.5 minutes, something like that. So it's not bad, and of course down the road you could sell it, and that's what some people did back in the day, or actually they would get multiple Hearts of Gold. Again, tanks, very hard to farm, but now you can upgrade it into the Randuin's Omen, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Next item on the list, Giant's Belt. Obviously not a starting item, it is a basic item that is quite expensive, but it does give you a big chunk of health and upgrades to a lot of really decent items. Mostly I will just talk about the Giant Belt in context of those other items, because there's no value to getting the belt by itself. You're getting it because you want to upgrade to something else, so we'll talk about that later. Leviathan, awesome item, very good. Now, upgrading to the Leviathan does not give you any more health than the Ruby Crystal on its own. The Ruby Crystal gives you 180 health, so does the Leviathan. You need to build stacks with the Leviathan to make it worthwhile. How many stacks? Well, I believe the calculation is the break-even point is around 10 stacks, which is 5 kills or 5 assists, or some combination of both. Of course, every time you die, you lose those stacks. So you do need to be pretty careful about not dying to make Leviathan worth the money. And so it's really going to depend on what kind of hero you're playing, what kind of game you can play. If you've got a hero that you're pretty good at not dying with, the Leviathan will be a great item, because at some point you're going to pick up, at the very least 5 assists, even if you're not getting kills, at which point it will have broken even, and then if you can keep stacking stacks, then it gets better and better. And of course, the more stacks in Leviathan you have, the harder you are to die, which means the more your chances are of keeping your Leviathan stacks. And once you get to 20 stacks, you get the 15% less damage. Really, really quite good. And Leviathan is fairly inexpensive at $12.75. It is not very expensive. You can get it fairly early. Of course, most of these snowball items that grow with stacks, you do want to get early-ish. Maybe not your first item, but conceivably you can get an item, your boots, a Leviathan, and then you're in pretty good shape. A good tank item. Phage. Phage is an incredibly good item on all kinds of characters, for 2 reasons. Well, for a variety of reasons. Yes, it gives you a little bit of attack damage, but that's not why you're buying a Phage. You can upgrade to a whole other slew of items just to get attack damage. It's quite nice and means it's a good choice for a DPSer. It also gives you health, which is very nice. A lot of damage-dealing characters don't end up picking up a lot of health items, so the Phage can give you a half-decent amount, especially if you want something like Dorn's Shield into Phage. You're walking around with much more hit points than your average damage-dealing character, and you're going to be in good shape for a lot of duels, or even in group fights. People can't burst you down quite that fast. You'll have the opportunity to get off your full combo.